Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Studio. If you would like to get your very own beautiful Treton headphones like the ones you see on screen, look no further. They're running a special campaign where you get this free travel case, which you can also see on screen, as well as free and fast worldwide shipping. And to make things even better, if you punch in the code MORTIS15 at discount, you get a sweet 15% off. How great is that? I personally love the headphones, as you probably know from the other videos, and I think Studio are a really cool and awesome brand. And honestly, if you want some quality headphones, I would always recommend them. But anyway, for now guys, it's time to get comfortable. Make sure your car is fully filled up with gas, and let the darkness take control. I am a 38-year-old male, and this happened to me when I was about 20. I was off to college. I need you to be aware that I possessed a driving license, but hadn't needed to use it since I passed my test. You see, both my parents were retired. I was the product of two divorcee parents who had separate families, who got together and had one last kid, me. I was spoiled as hell, and they'd always drive me around, so there was never any need to drive myself, apart from maybe one or two odd occasions. Point being, I wasn't all that confident behind the wheel, despite passing my test. Now this happened when I was at college. I'd met a really interesting guy called Alfred, and we got along great. We had loads of debates between ourselves about philosophy, science, religion, and everything. He was truly my best friend. It was around spring break, just a few weeks before, that we thought it would be a fantastic idea to do a road trip. Alfred was the one who suggested it, and I was all for it. I'd never done a road trip before, but the way he planned it out, we'd be stopping in really remote areas all across various states to try and see some of its natural beauty. One part in particular that he wanted to see was the desert. So, as time went on, the days got closer to our road trip. We made sure we put in all necessary preparations, and we went ahead. Bear in mind, this was in the days before prolific internet use, so we had to make all our reservations in advance via the telephone, which we did. The first 4 days were absolutely great, but on the 5th day, we had to reach a desert-side motel right outside the city. We knew that it was far, and truth be told, we had stayed in our last city for a bit too long. At least the desert was on the outskirts and by the highway, so it wasn't too hard to get to. Now this particular stretch of road that we had decided to travel on was more for the sake of its beauty than the speed that we would be going at. Albert was convinced that it was a more valuable use of our time, even if it would cost us an extra hour or two. During the daylight, I agreed, and it was a moonless night, so it was nigh impossible to see into the distance. I really wish I could have. I'm sure it would have been a very stunning sight. We drove, and that's when we got the indication that we were running out of gas. Now, many of you are thinking, we probably should have taken additional gas in the back, or been quite sensible when traversing a desert highway. You'd think so, right? And you'd be wrong. Truth is that we had been quite stingy, and only really wanted to fill up when necessary. Don't ask why, I still don't know. As we were driving, we realized that the gas meter was getting ever lower, and we were starting to get worried. Consulting our maps, we looked, and there seemed to be a gas station not too far ahead, maybe about 10 miles or so. We knew we could easily make it. When we arrived, there was nothing. I mean, there was a gas pump, sure, and what looked like a very small shop. However, it was closed, and it was about 11 p.m. at this point. We were starting to get scared. What did we do? Did we leave cash on the doorstep and try to fill up the pump? Or what? We were nervous, so we decided to wait in the car and see if anyone would come. We went up and knocked on the door. There was no answer. We were starting to get afraid. We weren't sure if we should just stay the night and sleep here instead and lose our hotel reservation. Here's another thing. The lights were on, just 2, and it would occasionally flicker. I don't know the word for these kind of lights, but they're these long tube lights, and it would give off this very creepy vibe. We opted that we should just stay in the car and have a nap until someone came in the morning to open up the gas station. I mean, there was no one else around. It was desert and nothing. So, feeling safe enough, we reclined in our seats and tried our best to have a night in the car. I wish we'd had blankets. The car was deathly cold, and we didn't want to leave the engine running for heating in case we ran out of gas and this place didn't open. Now that would be a problem. So, I pass out. At 3 a.m, something's bugging me, and I wake up and the door is wide open. The lights at the gas station are now off, and it's almost impossible to see. I start squinting in the dark, seeing if I can see anyone, but there's nothing. Just the cold desert air entering the car, soaking my body in cold. I open the door and look around, still not seeing anyone. I assume the lights must have been sensors, because at that very moment did they flicker back to life, and my surroundings were illuminated. A seeming safe haven of light in the infinite sea of dark that surrounded me. I could make out a few things, but not much. Where had he gone? Why had he gone? I looked around the back of the place. He wasn't there. I tried the door handle of the gas station, and it didn't open. It was still locked. There wasn't even a sign, but taking a closer look into the window, I could still see lights illuminating their cold drinks fridge, which gave me hope that someone would be here in the morning. I checked to see if there was perhaps a toilet, and there was, and when I shouted, there was no response. I waited and waited and waited in the car, eventually just falling asleep and waking up in the morning. I woke up, almost not remembering what happened earlier that night, and when I looked to my right, no one was there. Where the hell had he gone? A growing feeling of dread hit the pit of my stomach like a brick, and I bolted out the car and asked myself if maybe he'd just gone into the gas station moments before I woke up, trying to not disturb me. I looked around. He wasn't there. I did buy gas, filled up, bought some snacks, threw them in the car, and checked the toilets. Nothing. No one. I asked the girl behind the counter if she'd seen my friend. She said that she saw me there when she arrived, but didn't want to disturb me, and that she hadn't seen anyone else. I was getting very, very scared, and I asked if they had CCTV by any chance. She confirmed, and seeing as there was no one else around, humoured me in looking through it. We looked through the dull grey images, until we found the moment when the car door opened and he just kind of walked out and left. He went off down the road. I thought maybe he'd gone mad. Maybe something had happened. He was walking in the direction that I was supposed to be driving. I thanked the girl, gave her a 20, and bolted off in the car, driving as fast as I could. I tried to do some quick math, assuming that he'd walk at a couple of miles an hour, that he couldn't be that far down. I drove, and I drove, and I drove, and I drove, and I kept on going. At this point, I'd already driven about 3 hours, and there was no sign of him. I made sure to look on each part of the road, and up and down the desert. There wasn't like there was anyone here to stop me from going as fast as I wanted, or as slow as I wanted, or to take the occasional break and shout into the distance. When I got to the motel that we were supposed to be staying at, did I park up the car in the parking lot and have a panic attack? What the hell happened here? I actually have no clue. So I walked in and apologized to the lady about the reservation. She didn't seem to mind, and I explained how we got stranded at the gas station that was closed. She said it was no biggie, that there weren't many people here anyway, but thanked me for telling her. I asked on the off chance that my friend had arrived and perhaps checked in the middle of the night. She looked around and said that no one had come. I was getting a very bad feeling. I decided to call the police, and they took a while to arrive, and upon doing some investigation, came up with inconclusive results. I don't know what happened. I didn't finish the rest of the road trip. I drove the car very nervously back to college, parked it up, and went to my dorm. It was then that I was greeted by his sullen girlfriend, who was shrieking at me that she had just received word from his parents that he had been found alive, at the very same gas station, mind you, that they'd received a call and gone and fetched him immediately. He was the one who was apparently confused. He asked why I'd just abandoned him at the gas station and driven off. He was very pissed. But after careful explanation, did his parents explain that he had been missing for a while, and according to them, gave them a look as if they had gone insane. I drove down to his parents' house as quickly as I could, and when I was met with him, he demanded an explanation to what had happened. I explained. I'd woken up at 3, checked, and he was gone. I looked around and he was nowhere to be seen. In the morning when the gas station opened up, we checked the cams, and it showed that he just walked off into the distance, and that I knew nothing after that, and that I drove along the highway in a desperate search attempt, even reaching the shady motel, and to receive nothing, that the police had looked for him, and he was missing. He told me that that was impossible. He'd got up and decided to go for a little stroll to clear his head. He needed some air, and just wanted the cold air to refresh him, so he walked in the desert a bit. When he saw something in the distance, it was a cave-like structure. He was bored, had a flashlight, and thought he would go investigate. It's important to note at this point that he said that the skies were clearing up, and there was plenty of moon visibility. When he reached the small cave, he found nothing of interest, but decided to have a sit down as he was a little wary. He inevitably passed out, and woke up some time later. He got up out of the little cave, checked his watch, and realized it was 8 a.m. He wasn't sure if I'd be awake yet, but was fairly certain that I would wait for him, as it was out of his character to just goof off like that. But when he got back, did he realize that a lot of time had passed, more so than he had expected. He thought it was the cashier just messing with him, telling him that he'd been missing for a while, and when he called his parents to ask what the hell was going on, did they frantically drive down to collect him. We were so confused. Once he told me this, I asked him if he was sure nothing else had happened, and he was positive. He said he found that rock extremely uncomfortable, but just did it because he couldn't be bothered to do the walk back. I don't know what to believe. How can someone lose nearly a week of time and not even realize? He certainly wasn't asleep for that long. I mean, he would have died of dehydration. He's one of my closest friends, and I'm not sure whether I should believe him or not. His sincerity and everything about his demeanor said to me that he had certainly spent that amount of time doing what he said he has. But it's impossible, isn't it? I live in a small town on the border of Texas and Mexico. I was always raised to be very independent and had just learnt to drive at the age of 12. I was a late-in-life child, and my father died when I was young, so it was just my mother and I. At 14, I was a pretty good driver, because I had been driving for a couple of years, but I was still a kid. Anyway, my family in Fort Worth had an emergency, and my mother decided that I was going to drive us up there. My mother didn't drive, so I was going to be doing the driving from the border to Fort Worth, which is an 8-hour drive at 14 years old. I was a little afraid, and so I got a church friend of mine to go with me. He was cool, about 35, and a recovering alcoholic. Since it was an emergency, we took off at about midnight. Since I wasn't experienced at driving on freeways, only country roads, we decided to take nothing but small town highways. There are 2 Texas cities that connect with a small road that is so old it's rather creepy at night. You just have 2 lanes and no shoulder. At one point, the road crosses a river, and the lanes get even smaller. Honestly, only 1 car can pass the river at a time. It's more like a lane and a half than 2. It's okay though, because it's only about 20 yards to cross the river. And when the river is flooded, there is no way to get through, because the bridge would be underwater. No guardrails or anything, so you can just drive your car in the river if you choose to. So at about 2 or 3 in the morning, my mother, my friend and I are travelling down this creepy, lonely, deserted road in the middle of nowhere. Of course, I'm driving because at 14 I owned my own car and was going to drive my damn car. After almost an hour of not seeing another vehicle on the road, we noticed that there's a truck coming in the opposite direction. Let me clarify. We saw headlights coming. I noticed and anticipated it reaching us at a certain time because of how fast they were going. But it took longer than I expected. I realized it was because they stopped moving and just stopped in the middle of the highway. When I finally passed them, they were a full stop and made a U-turn as soon as we passed. This was creepy because we were the only 2 cars out of the road. They suddenly gained on us and stayed right behind us. All of us are awake and incredibly nervous, even though we haven't spoken about what was happening. But it was a big truck, and we were in a low regular sedan, so the headlights were flooding the car with illumination, and honestly, just blinding us. Finally, my friend says to slow down and let them pass. I came down to about 30, and the truck would not pass, and stayed right on my ass. That's when I realized I needed to go to the other extreme, and started driving at 75. This was hard to do in a small meandering country road, as you would expect. They were on my ass the whole time. They kept up with me when I was going fast and slowed down. I did it several times, and they wouldn't pass me, and just stayed right on my ass. Then, After a while of us sweating bullets and deciding what would be our last stand, some lights started flashing from the truck. It was really strange because it wasn't an obvious marked police or government vehicle. I do remember it was a Chevy truck with a half camper in the back, where you can put a bed. It was easy to recognize because my cousin had one just like it, and it was awesome. So we're dealing with flashing lights, as if a cop is trying to pull us over. My friend immediately says, "Don't you dare pull over. This could just be a bunch of drunk rednecks who decided to outfit the truck with some flashing lights and want to have some fun with us before calling it a night after getting drunk while hunting. Who knows what they're gonna do." After a couple of minutes of going back and forth, I finally decide to pull over. And then we sat there until they decided to get out of the truck. One got out of each side of the truck and came up to my vehicle. Finally, there's a knock on the window, and they asked us for documents because they were Border Patrol. I don't know whether to get off and hug them, because they weren't crazy people trying to hurt us, or smack them for scaring the crap out of us. They were in an unmarked vehicle for better undercover surveillance, so as soon as they checked us out, we left and continued on our way. Even though we were driving at night, that adrenaline rush kept us going until the end of the trip. Not long ago, my partner and I were driving through reservation land at about 11 o'clock at night, in the desert southwest of the USA. We were on a major highway, but as with so many highways in the area, it's not very well used, just barely paved, and with only one lane going in each direction. No lights, just reflectors embedded in the pavement. It's not uncommon to go an hour on the highway without seeing another vehicle. I was reading a book out loud when suddenly my buddy who was driving interrupts and pulls off the side of the road, braking quickly. "Did you see that?" "No," I replied. "See what?" "The van! It went off the road!" I turned in my seat, but couldn't make anything out. On or off the road? It was just darkness all around. He grabbed the flashlight that we kept in the car and asked me to call 911. He's in a medical profession and a lapped licensed EMT, and I've worked in emergency response, so this isn't super uncommon for me. Although, not even being able to see the accident was a first for me. I got on the phone with 911 immediately and set about trying to find a mile marker using my phone as a flashlight, eventually settling for giving them approximate GPS coordinates, as I had very little coverage and my GPS was acting flighty in that area. The dispatcher asked me to cross the highway carefully and try to ascertain the status of the passengers, since they had gone straight over a hill and presumably into the canyon below. I stayed on the line while I trudged over the sand dunes on the opposite side of the highway. I was a bit nervous to be walking in this area in sandals, as we had just recently been discussing the rattlesnake population in the region, and I couldn't really see where I was going and answered the dispatcher questions at the same time. But the scrubby vegetation gave me some purchase, and finally I crested the largest dune and could see the outline of the accident site. On the road, the moonlight was blocked by the dunes, but on this side, it was strangely bright. It took my brain a moment to make sense of what I was seeing. They had been lucky. The van had turned on its side and slid, and the friction from the dunes had just barely prevented the entire thing from going over the edge into the massive canyon below. My partner called out to me and asked me to check on the woman in the van, and I saw that next to him, standing with a scarecrow-like stiffness, was a young man. He looked dazed and didn't seem to be answering many questions. I got the darkest vibe off that guy that I've ever encountered, and I felt goosebumps crawling up my back, and it was just like there was a permanent ring of shadow around him. I felt very uneasy, knowing that either of us were anywhere near him, and made a point to keep visually checking up on them. I proceeded to the site and around the van, and called out to identify myself. I heard the voice of a woman inside, and as I walked around the windshield, I could see her. She was crouched in the passenger cabin, clearly in shock, her feet bleeding as she shifted back and forth in the broken glass of the driver's side window. A tall, willowy woman, thin and pale, with dark hair. There was also a massive wolfhound, panting. It appeared equally stunned. I saw that they had managed to pry the passenger side window open, and the man must have climbed out through the top that way. The woman spoke to me for a time, calmly, and with an urgency I couldn't quite identify in her voice. I relayed the information to the dispatcher. Yes, it was just the two of them. No, they don't seem to be seriously injured. No, nobody had fallen asleep at the wheel. They were on their way to Texas to visit family. They were living out of the van. What I remember most clearly is that I made a couple of attempts to convince her to either climb out of the roof or through the back to clear a way for the van just to be safe, but she politely refused each time. She said that she didn't want to leave the dog. There was something just wrong with her demeanor. People react differently to stress, then she seemed alert and competent. So I put it to the back of my mind, but I kept being struck by a strangeness in her handling of the situation. Dispatch and I agreed that the paramedics could probably easily break the windshield and free them, and that there was no sign of fuel. So it was fine for her to stay in there until they arrived. Once I double-checked that she was secure and wasn't going to go anywhere, I handed off the phone to my partner while I went out to wave in the paramedics, who had accidentally passed the site and were backing towards us further up the highway, looking for our flashlight thanks to the dispatcher. They pulled off a ways up from the site, and I began to brief them when we all heard dispatch come over the radio. Please be advised that the male passenger is AMS and considered dangerous. AMS stands for Altered Mental Status, suggesting that someone isn't in the normal frame of mind for any of a variety of reasons. We all stopped in our tracks. The paramedics exchanged a glance, and one went back to the ambulance for additional equipment. I was eager to get back to my partner, to make sure he hadn't communicated to that dispatch out of concern for his safety. But when we arrived on site, they were still talking quietly. I went to my car to find shoes for the woman. The passengers were placed in different ambulances, and the police arrived to interview all around us. Just as we were about to leave, an officer taking our statements turns to us and said, "It's real messed up. I guess she was driving and wanted to kill them both, so he grabbed the wheel and overpowered her. It's lucky either of them are alive." After a couple of hours, when we were back to driving, my partner proceeded to fill in the details. When he first got to the scene, the woman was yelling that he had tried to kill her and not to leave her alone with him. She also said that if he got out, he needed to be restrained, as he was a danger to himself and others. The man was very eager to be out of the vehicle. Bewildered, my partner had nonetheless helped the guy pry the door open, and once he was out, the guy had just clammed up and wouldn't do much other than nod or shake his head in response to questions. He kept thinking that the guy might take off and get lost in the desert, but in the end, he had waited. He said the guy had seemed agitated, so he was doing his best to keep him engaged and distracted until help could arrive. It's chilling to realize that what we had thought was an accident was actually a murder-suicide attempt. I really wanted to accompany the woman to the hospital, but for unrelated reasons we couldn't remain. We went back that way during the day on a return trip a week later. We pulled over at the site and climbed over the dunes to see whether they had managed to tow the van over the sand, and sure enough, it was gone. What was unnerving was the realization upon seeing the landscape during the day that if he had chosen any other spot to grab the wheel, for miles in both directions, they would have been over a cliff almost immediately. In the dark, where there was no way for him to tell, he had chosen the only spot where they realistically could have survived the accident. My partner then told me that they had gone off the road when they were nearly opposite our little sedan on the highway. If the guy had opted for a head-on collision instead of off the cliff, we would have been toast. It was a sobering thought. I think of the woman I met that night often, and of her wolfhound, being gingerly coaxed in the back of a police car. I really hope that they are in a much better place now. As for the guy who tried to kill them all, I certainly hope that he gets help, and that we never have cause to meet him again. As someone who has grown up on an infamous haunted plantation, I've never been scared of ghosts. Curious and intrigued, yes, but never scared. In fact, I have gone through a lot of trouble just to go to a haunted house or location. I live in Virginia, so there are a lot of places to check out. There has only been one incident when I've been scared so badly that I'll never ghost hunt again, and it wasn't even anything paranormal. When this particular incident happened, I was 19. My boyfriend at the time and I were very explorative, and we made it into a thing to go around at midnight and go ghost hunting at random places. He lived in Williamsburg, Virginia, so there were lots of places to go. We would go around the Newport News areas as well. Some famous places that we visited were Old House Woods, Crawford Road, Roswell House, etc. One night, we decided we were bored and wanted to get our group of friends together to do some ghost hunts. We've got 3 of our friends on board and got ready to head out for the night. Usually we would smoke a few blunts on the ride, and when we were nice and toasted would we go to our destination. On this night, we decided to check out Roswell, and then on our way back home, we were going to take a detour through Crawford Road. The night started out really fun. We basically couldn't stop laughing the entire night. One of my friends, on the other hand, couldn't shake this bad feeling he was having. He insisted that we go home or get some food at a fast food place. He was also insisting that we skip Crawford Road because it was too out of our way from their apartment complex. Me and my boyfriend were very insistent that we checked out Crawford Road, and since my boyfriend was driving, my friend didn't get a say in the matter. We jumped back into the car, got some McDonald's, and headed to Crawford Road. Crawford Bridge is just this little bridge on a very desolate, creepy road. If I remember the road, it was about 10 miles long. The bridge was where they would go to hang slaves, so the area had common reports of ghost sightings. When we got on Crawford Road, we decided that when we got to the bridge we would get out and get a better look and take pictures. I'll remind you, this is 1:30 a.m. My boyfriend and I were not scared, but I guess the idea of that scared the shit out of my who was already freaking out previously friend. At the time, I thought my friend being scared all of a sudden was extremely strange, because he usually loved doing this stuff. He kept on just saying he had a bad feeling, and that he could always trust his gut. We should have listened. But we were stubborn, and were almost at the bridge. Right as we came around the corner to see the bridge, we saw a car parked on the side of the road. As we got a little closer to the car came on, and so did the lights. We assumed that it was some teenagers checking out the landmarks like we were. But as we were passing them, we saw the outline of two older men, and I did see that they were both bald. It sent chills down my spine, so I told my boyfriend to keep driving, and he agreed that we shouldn't stop or get out. We passed slowly, but when we were about to turn the corner for the bridge to be out of view, we saw the car slowly turn around, turn on their high beams, and start following us. At first we were a little freaked out, but you know, coincidences happen. About 2 miles down the road, this car was right on our tail. We decided to go faster than normal to lose him. The speed limit on this road was between 30 and 40, and we were going 65 to try and shake the car. The whole time, the car was so close to ours it was almost touching. At this point, we are officially freaked out. My friend who was originally freaking out was now in tears, and we officially are being chased down by these guys. I felt a lot of relief when I saw that there was a turn onto a highway up ahead. There were almost no cars on the road, so we didn't even stop at the sign. We ran through, and so did the car behind us. We saw a 7-Eleven up ahead, and we thought that if we turned into it, they would just keep going and leave us alone. But no, they followed us right into the 7-Eleven parking lot. We would be the only ones in the parking lot together, and at the time, I didn't think any of us wanted to come face to face with the mysterious bald men. My boyfriend, unexpectedly, punched it out the parking lot, followed by the mysterious car. At this point, we honestly all thought we were going to die. We had no idea what the intentions of these people were, but we knew that obviously it wasn't good, and we have been specifically targeted. Once we got on the road, we were flying. I mean, we hit 100 miles per hour easily. We were all screaming, and I managed to call the police. But I was in hysterics, going in 100, in an area that I wasn't familiar with a car chasing us. At some point, the car got from behind us and got into the other lane. This was a 2-lane highway, and there was no passing allowed on this road. I looked over and thought I saw a flash of something metallic come up from the window, possibly a gun. That's when all of a sudden, my boyfriend slams on his brakes. The other car kept on going at 100, as we quickly tried to turn around. When I look back, I see them stopping, and also trying to turn around. By the time they turned around, we were already flying in the other direction. Somehow, I'm not sure how, but we lost them. We tried to find the most populated area we could, and once we found a random apartment complex, we stopped the car and we all started crying. My friend, who told us we shouldn't go, was yelling at us. He was going on about how we needed to be more careful and started trusting our instincts. Let me tell you, I have never not trusted his gut feelings again. This could have gone a lot worse that night, and I'm very thankful that it didn't. Later that month, I had learned that that area was known for gang activity. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way that anything could happen at any time. I was very stupid and stubborn back then. All those times we went ghost hunting, not once did I think there could be a murderer waiting for a group of stupid kids like us to come by. So creepy bald guys on Crawford Road, let's not meet again. I love road trips. There's nothing more delightful to me then to get up an hour before sunrise and hit the road to a destination some hundreds of miles distant. However, there are occurrences in the wee hours when time gets thin and reality blurs around the edges. I'd like to share 3 of these stories that all share a phenomenon I've come to call the screaming between. The first was during my move from North Carolina to California. I made it in a 4-day blitz across the continental US, which I was pretty proud of. Day 1 passed with no trouble, moving from Goldsboro, North Carolina to Prattville, Alabama in about 12 hours. Day 2, I got all the way from Prattville to Baton Rouge, and I knocked off early to enjoy some bayonets and gumbo. Day 3 was the day I heard it. It was about 4 in the afternoon, with a relatively clear day all around me. October isn't the hottest time in Texas, but my AC had stopped working, so I had the window down. VMV Nation's Nemesis was blaring out of my crappy Honda Civic speakers when I heard a god-awful shrieking. It was like the sound of a big sheet of steel being torn lengthwise. In a panic, I turn off into a small pullout on the side of an I-10, and before I can even begin to figure out what's going on, rain is hitting the car. A couple of drops, then a torrent, and just ahead of me, where the road dips a bit, I see a tunnel of water start. I look to my left down the south, and this massive thunderhead is falling from behind a bottle, and this wall of water is starting to pour across the road. Never saw anything like it before, and I was stranded there for a good 40 minutes as this flash flood poured not 20 feet ahead of my car and across the road. The next time was a road trip to Idaho, from my new home in Mogav. I took the route up through Nevada via Amboy and Vegas, figuring I could do the trip in about a day, since the GPS predicted a 12 to 13 hour drive. The snow was starting to come down. This was a Christmas trip, and a favorite time of year of mine for visiting family and friends. I had gotten roughly halfway there, around the town of Wells. It's honestly a bunch of truck stops and hotels, more of a stopover than a real town, and I was starting to get drowsy. I'd taken longer than expected due to a major traffic holdup a few hours before, and it was already pitch black around 11:30 p.m. I had just rolled down the window to let a blast of cool air reinvigorate me when I heard it. That same horrifying shriek of sound. I jerked the wheel reflexively and skidded off the road. At exactly that moment, an oncoming semi drifted right into the lane I'd been in. The last story is another Christmas road trip. This time I was going from Mogav all the way to Illinois, and just my luck, a winter storm comes tearing along the I-70, just as I'm getting on it during day 2 of my trip. It was insane. I'd gone from slightly snowy, but mostly clear day in Utah, to near whiteout conditions in under an hour. Now I'm pretty comfortable driving in snow, and my SUV had snow chains and a 4WD in good condition, as I'd replaced the Honda Civic a while back, so I figured I can keep going a few more hours at least. Then of course I hear it, that infernal hell shriek of a sound. This time, I could swear I heard it saying 13, as it screamed through the winter snow. By this time I am entirely out of shits to give when it comes to the screaming, so I hit the next exit and ducked into a hotel, even though it was only 7 p.m, and I'd been on the road for less than 9 hours. The next day, as I'm driving, I counted 12 vehicles on the side of the road, overturned and wrecked, each one with massive gashes on the side of the vehicle. like they'd been peeled back by some horrible force. I still love road trips, but part of me is always listening for that screaming sound when I'm driving and between towns. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's installment. Road trip stories are certainly very freaky. You never know what can happen to you out on the open road, I suppose. If you liked the video, it would mean a lot to me if you'd hit like and drop a comment with your thoughts. Why don't we try and get to 10,000 likes? No, let's not do that again. But yeah, drop a like and leave a comment. It always goes a long way. If you're new here, why not subscribe and press the little bell icon to be up to date every time I post. And yes, that screaming in the background is my daughter. Why? It's because it's sleepy time and she doesn't want to go to sleep. For all of you wondering, because I'm sure she screamed in other of my videos too. If there's a story that you wish to share, go ahead and send it to my email or Reddit. Just be sure to be generous on those descriptions and grammar. And, paragraphs are important too. But anyway, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.